Cuts to Medicaid-funded services have many feeling on edge.
Some of the impacts of the big, beautiful bill won't take effect until 2027. First Alert 6's Philip Catafamo spoke with a woman in Weeping Water, already preparing for the worst.
In May, First Alert 6 spoke with Colleen Rothy-Grolo and her older brother Scott. At the time, she was concerned proposed cuts to Medicaid would impact Scott's care. Childhood health problems left Scott multi-handicapped. He lives full-time in an Omaha group home.
Medicaid covers his day services. Medicaid covers his living services. Virtually every part of his care requires Medicaid.
A month later, the big, beautiful bill passed, adding more uncertainty to the future of the services he relies on.
I don't know exactly where all of the monies come from. I don't know how much money comes from donors, how much money comes from the federal government, how much money comes from Medicaid, Medicare. I don't know where all the finances are.
Cuts to healthcare services are something many organizations are keeping tabs on. Leaders with the Nebraska Association of Service Providers say it's important to start gathering medical documents now.
Get all of that handy, or at least know the names of the clinicians and their contact information. Make sure DHHS and Social Security both have correct addresses for you, the correct phone numbers for you, maybe even a backup phone number or address just to be on the safe side.
With questions still lingering, Colleen is acting now, spending thousands to prepare her home to begin caring for Scott if his services are eliminated.
We have a ramp already built. We need to finish it. We have a bathroom that we're remodeling. We need to finish it. There are a number of structural issues that we're trying to keep in place just to prepare.
If the worst happens, Colleen says she will have to care for Scott full-time, which would be challenging.
We already have a house full of people. We already have residents in the house who are disabled. My husband's a disabled first responder. There's no way that he can be a sole caretaker for my brother. I would have to either work remotely or stop working altogether.
For now, Colleen continues her effort to bring concerns to state and local lawmakers, not backing down from the fight to get people like Scott the care they deserve. In Omaha, I'm Philip Catafamo, First Alert 6.
Colleen tells First Alert 6 she's also fearful her husband could lose his disability status under Medicaid as new work requirements take effect in a few years.